Megadeth. No. Sinatra. No. Real human. No. jromy1@pps.net. No. Oh, sorry, I just clearly didn't see you there. I was just erasing these horrible name suggestions for my baby. Hi, let's just go ahead and do some vocab work here. So if you can get into your vocab notebook here, and if you can join me, let's jump in first with a word that is also a part of your requirements for this class, and that is the counterclaim. So counterclaim is the opposite position of your claim. So when you're thinking counterclaim, I want you to think a little bit about our mock Portland City Council meeting and any organization that had the complete opposite belief as what you personally believe. That's probably your counterclaim. You're going to include that in your letter, something like many people believe or some people say, and then you're going to rebut it. So your rebuttal is your response to a point or a counterclaim. You have this in your packet right here, these sentence starters for counterclaims. You don't have to use them, but it's a place to start. But remember that you're really going to want for your rebuttal some sort of, you don't need to know this term, but conjunctive adverb like however or nevertheless, in order to transition and point out why your counterclaim is wrong. That's kind of the biggest piece in that rebuttal. Make sure that you're including at least 1 to 2 pieces of evidence for your counterclaim and rebuttal as well. A similar word to rebuttal, if you've got that, is this term debunk. So to debunk is a verb. You could also use it in the past tense. This has been debunked as an adjective. To debunk is to expose the falseness or hollowness of a myth, an idea, or a belief. So in the act of rebutting your counterclaim, you're probably also going to be debunking maybe some evidence, some arguments, or even some belief systems around that. Mythbusters is a good example of debunking something, right? There's an entire TV show based on that. All right. Speaking of debunking, I want to run through, this is kind of an extension option for those of you that are really into unit vocabulary. I want to run through 2 different theories here that have been debunked, but that show up a lot when we have conversations about law and order and about policing, and particularly about police funding. So this first one is actually sunk cost theory. So sunk cost theory, you may be familiar with it, is the idea that because we've already invested resources into something, we should continue investing into them. And I want to show you a very quick video from an account that I think explains sunk cost theory quite well, called OK Joseph. I'll link to it as well. If you're interested, you can learn more about this person. Here we go.
Sunk cost theory.
All right. So that went by very quickly, and I want to be clear about that. But let's talk about a couple of the examples that were brought up as sunk cost theory. Gambling is an easy one, right? I should stay at this machine because I've invested this time. But also think about how that might apply to relationships or friendships in your life, or even things like musical instruments or sports, where you keep going with something not because it's actually serving you or someone, but because of the length of time that you've put into it, right? Whether it's playing an instrument, being in a toxic friendship, Or you can think institutionally here. What are those patterns or policies from school that we just keep doing because we've been doing them that maybe aren't even serving us anymore? Could this extend into policing or prisons, or your idea of what needs to change or what should stay the same? Sunk cost theory. Take a moment and write down that definition if you haven't yet already. All right, I got one more theory for you, also that's been debunked. So this one is called veneer theory, also a noun because it's a concept, person, place, thing. So the idea of veneer theory is the idea that without the thin veneer of law and order and authority, human beings revert to selfish beasts, that it is only our rules and our policing and our court system that keeps us from the savagery of our neighbors. Now, in order to better understand this and also understand how it has been debunked but still really persists, especially when we think about concepts like law and order or policing, it's important to know a little bit of history. So this picture on the bottom here is a picture from a very famous experiment that this theory came out of, and that's called the Stanford Prison Experiment. And a very oversimplified explanation of the Stanford Prison Experiment was that they took regular college kids and they assigned them into two groups. You were either prisoners or you were prison guards. And they put them into this prison, and then they just recorded and saw what happened. And what happened in the experiment was that the guards became increasingly hostile and increasingly like brutal to the prisoners, even though there wasn't anything provoking it. It was just that the guards were above the law now, all of these things were restricted, and they could do things like torture the students that were prisoners. Now, out of this experiment it got a lot of attention. It was really, like, oh my gosh, like shocking, came this idea that at our core, human beings are actually very bad, and the moral nature of human beings is only actually held together by the laws of society. Now, you had a previous word in this that was debunked. This particular experiment, the Stanford Prison Experiment, has actually been debunked because when researchers came back to it decades later and went back through all the findings, they found that the folks conducting the experiment, the experimenters themselves, were actually actively egging on the students that were working as prisoners to do all of the cruel and inhumane things that they did to the the students working as guards, to do that to the prisoners. So in fact, it was not an unpeeling of the layers of society that exposed the true evil nature of humans. It was the experimenters egging them on to have a more interesting thing to write about, essentially. So, but that doesn't mean that veneer theory doesn't persist in all sorts of different ways in our society. Think about the reason why we have certain rules, or where we have certain people enforce those rules, right? There's a big conversation now about why are police the right people to be addressing mental health issues or to be addressing traffic stops, or what's the role here? I want you to think about and engage with, where does veneer theory show up in all of these things? Maybe even in your classroom, maybe even in your parent-child dynamics. Take a moment and write down our explanation for veneer theory now. All right, that's what I've got for you. I just want to say a huge, I am so fascinated to read where you're going to take this, what your opinions are, and that this is very much a real life example of argumentatives, right? Letters to elected officials are actually where you can have your story, your words be told. Editorials are other ones. This is where an editorial board of an organization, a newspaper, a magazine will get together and publish an opinion piece. Op-eds are when you write into a newspaper or magazine with your own opinion. Press releases are released by organizations arguing for their perspective or updating the press on what's going on in their organization. These are all great examples of real life argumentatives, and I can't wait to see where you take yours. Bye.